the ultimate step-by-step writing guide for VCE English language essays. Let's do this. Hello and welcome. My name is Richard. I scored a 50 in VCE Eng Lang. And in today's video tutorial, I'm going to walk you through exactly my step-by-step process for writing high-scoring essay responses for Units 3, 4 in particular. There are some minor differences between Unit 1, 2 and Unit 3, 4 essays. The main one being that we need to present real-life contemporary examples in our Year 12 essays, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to find those examples, how to present them, etc., etc. So, a quick disclaimer before we jump into things. It's not like I'm special and somehow gifted with English. I actually had a lot of trouble with English when I was younger, all throughout high school until I switched into VCE English language, and then it clicked with me. It was more of a step-by-step formula. Thankfully, my teacher was a VCAR examiner. She was able to give me a blueprint and teach me the subject like a math or a science, and that's what I'm going to do with you today. So if that type of learning works well for you, you're a little bit more analytically minded, then hopefully having a step-by-step process like this that you can just follow and come back to if you need is going to be beneficial. So all of that said, the way that I'm going to structure this video, it's going to be split into two parts. The first part will be content and theory. We're going to run through what the process is. And then once I've done that and we've covered the theory, then I'm going to show you how I would actually apply it to a VCAR exam prompt. Included in all of this as well, I'm going to walk you through how I find contemporary, real-life, modern examples that are really high quality. There are a couple of little hacks there that will be beneficial for you, I hope. So that said, let's now jump into things. Boom. This is the essay writing guide. First thing that I want to do with you, this is from my student resource hub. So all of my private students get access to this hub. It's essentially Eng Lang cheat codes. It's like all of the step-by-step formulas as well as response templates and planning templates to get you started and moving in the right direction. Once you've used the planning templates and the response templates a couple of times, it'll all be ingrained in your mind. The words and the language in the templates will start coming to you naturally. Think about it as like assembling some IKEA furniture. Hey team, I thought I'd just quickly jump in and let you know we've actually decided to give you free access to the short answer question, AC, and essay writing guide over on the website. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, there'll be a link in the description for you to jump over there. If you're already on the website, there'll be a little box for you to pop your email address in, and we'll send you access from within the student resource hub. I hope you enjoy. Back to the tutorial. You would never just get all of the parts and then just wing it. You could do a lot of hard work, but wing it and your furniture be kind of not so good, to put it bluntly, or to put it politely, I should say. Alternatively, what you want to do once you've got all of the raw parts from IKEA, you want to get the instruction manual and you also want to get the tools to get the job done. So the instruction manual is the writing guide, and the tools to get the job done, at least to begin with, are the response templates and the planning templates that I have for my students. If you're a private student of mine, I'll be showing you how to use all of them in this video tutorial as well. If you're not a private student of mine and you're viewing this on a public platform like YouTube, then that part of the tutorial will be skipped for you, but you will nonetheless get a lot out of this. So, that said, let's first begin by breaking down what does VCAR look for exactly, and what are the micro skills that go into writing a high-scoring essay specifically for VCE English language Units 3, 4. So this isn't just some random essay. The essays that I write for my YouTube channel, very different to the essays that I write for VCE English language and the study score that I got there. I'm not sure if I mentioned I got a raw 50, so that's why you should trust me. So let's walk through this. If we break down essay writing here, we've got knowledge of the key themes is the first thing that we need to be on top of. So there are 7 key themes that are tested in 3-4 Eng Lang, and I'll run through them briefly a little bit later on, but they're listed down here. I'll give you a brief summary of each of them. But the recommendation that I give to my students is you want to get to the point where with your teacher or with your tutor or with a friend, you're able to sit down and have a 20-minute in-depth conversation about each of the 7 themes. That's kind of the level of depth that you want to be familiar with the themes, so that when you actually get tested on the themes with a particular prompt, you kind of have the base layer of knowledge to generate paragraph ideas and discuss and present examples. Think about it this way: 7 key themes, and every single prompt that you get in 3-4 is going to be testing one of those themes or an intersection of, say, 2 of those themes. So instead of thinking, I need to prepare for an infinite number of prompts, you don't have to. What you need to do is familiarize yourself with the 7 key themes, make sure you're confident in that base layer knowledge, and then no matter what the prompt is, it's going to be testing one of those things. And so you should be, if you've done your due diligence, you'll be able to tackle whatever prompt you get given. So that's the first thing, knowledge of the key themes. If you don't know that and you start tackling application tasks, or you haven't been taught the key themes and you start tackling application tasks, things are going to be very difficult for you. From there, we need to be good at generating paragraph ideas. Now, this is really important in year 12. There are two main ways to generate paragraph ideas. You'll start to notice some patterns the more prompts that you tackle and the more high scoring responses you read. But two main ways that I use and that I teach my students. One, you want to generate paragraph ideas from the keywords in the prompt, and I can show you this a little bit later on. But essentially, you scan the prompt for keywords, and then for each keyword or expression, you ask, can I drill down and structure my paragraphs around that? So for example, if the word identity is listed in the prompt, then you can go, okay, well, what are the different facets of identity that I could potentially structure my paragraphs around? Or if there's the word, let's say, for example, register, is it possible for me to structure my paragraphs around different types of register? Something like this. I'll give you a more concrete example a little further down the line. So paragraph ideas using keywords in the prompt or using the stimulus material. Now, this might be another difference if you're in Unit 1, 2, or even Year 10. You might not be given stimulus material for the practice essays that you get given, but in Year 12, you get given stimulus material. And it's a real skill that you need to practice that I would definitely recommend practicing of when you read the stimulus material, asking yourself, what is the paragraph clue that VCAR is giving me or that my teacher is giving me in this stimulus material? And if you can get really good at that skill, it almost means that no matter what prompt you get given, you'll be able to generate some high quality paragraph ideas just based off the stimulus material. And that can be really, really confidence inducing. It certainly gave me an extra spring in my step when I walked into my SACSA exam going, oh, okay, I actually have a skill, a micro skill in this case for the essay writing, where no matter what the prompt is, as long as I have stimulus material, I'm going to be able to pull out and generate some paragraph ideas from it. And that's, yeah, like I said, that's very confidence inducing. On to the next part. We know the themes. We've got some decent paragraph ideas. Now we need to actually have high quality examples to support the points that we're making in our paragraphs. The analogy that I give here for my students is you want to think about it. Let's say you're building a house. You could have a great blueprint. An architect might whip up a fantastic blueprint for a house, but unless you have the bricks and the mortar, the raw materials to actually build, all you have is a plan. And that's kind of like if you have great paragraph ideas, you know the theme that's being tested, but you don't have good examples. It's like having the plan without the actual bread and butter of your house, so to speak. I suppose I've mixed a couple of analogies there, but hopefully you catch my drift there. So we need high quality examples, in particular for Unit 3-4, to beef out and support the points that we're making in our paragraphs. And part of that is you need to be able to find high quality examples that are going to help you across all of the key themes. Now, I'll mention here good examples, really, really elite level examples are ones that make your point clearly, that you can use as evidence, but also are versatile because you have to have a bank essentially of examples that you can bring to the table for your SACs and your final exam. And if you have, say, a really good example, but you can only use it for one very niche prompt, then it's kind of hard to remember, say, 50 language examples across a number of niche different prompts. What's better is through practice and perhaps some guidance from your teacher and guidance from a tutor, you'll begin to figure out which of your language examples are the most high quality, but also the most versatile. So for example, there are some examples that I have that I share with my students that are super versatile in the sense that I can use them for pretty much all of Unit 4. And there are other ones that I can use for pretty much all of Unit 3. And all I need to do is tweak the way that I present them in order to make it, to present the example in a way that supports the point that I'm making. So they're the best examples, the ones that are the most versatile as well. Which brings me to the next micro skill here, which is presentation or positioning of high quality examples. So you know the key theme, right? You know the key theme. You've got some great paragraph ideas. You've got great examples. Now you need to know what to say so that that example really does support the point that you're making. And if you don't, this is where you need a little bit of a process or a structure or a blueprint to follow that will help you elucidate or bring out what do I need to say to impress VCAR and make the point that I want to make. That's really crucial. And then the final piece of the puzzle is just the language to express your ideas. So being able to have a really nice flow or expression or structure to your piece, and that applies for your intro, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion, which I will walk through a little bit later as well. So now that we've covered the skills breakdown, I will encourage all of you to, when you do complete an essay and you get feedback from, again, whether it's me, a tutor, or your teacher, you want to try and identify what is the thing holding you back, and then you want to laser focus in on that thing. So for example, you might find consistently you're familiar with the themes, you have great paragraph ideas, but then you get feedback that your examples are kind of they're pulling your mark down. And so then you want to go, okay, I'm going to invest, let's say you have 2 hours on the weekend to invest in Ing Lang progression. You shouldn't be investing that in just writing another essay. You should invest that in going, okay, where do I need to beef out my language examples folio so that this doesn't hold me back? Now, there might be another student who has pretty solid understanding of the themes, has great high quality examples, but really struggles generating paragraph ideas under test conditions. And so again, you want to then practice that specific skill. You want to become familiar with, okay, how do I generate paragraph ideas from those keywords or from the stimulus? And maybe you want to get some VCAR reps in, right? You pull up a couple of different VCAR exams, you look at the stimulus material, and for each one you're asking, what is the paragraph clue that VCAR is giving me? And then look at the high scoring responses and see what kind of paragraph ideas they generated as well. And just one more example here, right? You might have really good knowledge of the themes, great paragraph ideas, great examples, but you might just not know what to say about them to get the marks, right? And again, that's where you need to get clear on what is the thing holding you back and then laser focus in on that. That also allows you to go to your teacher or go to your tutor with a specific question of like, hey, I'm having trouble with this. How do I level up in this particular micro skill, we might say? Okay, onwards. So first thing I want to touch on is there's no one way to skin a cat. So your teacher might have a slightly different process to me. Another tutor might have a slightly different process to me. That's fine. All I can do with you is share with you what worked really well for me, what helped me get a 50, and what has also helped me with all of my students. Over 100, you can have a look at the Google reviews, over 150 Google reviews from students who have gone from being confused and feeling like they want to put the work in, but it's not translating to a result, kind of the same position that I was in mainstream English, and then eventually having a process like this and a lot of them scoring 40 plus study scores, which they just did not think was possible. So if you want something like that and you're more of a maths and sciencey student, again, there's no one way to skin a cat, but please start with some kind of process, whether it's a process from your teacher or a template from your teacher, or whether it's this one here. And then, you kind of want to copy what works and then you can improve it from there. So I've split this into before reading time and during reading time. And then also during writing time to just kind of give you an understanding of how to progress through this. I'm going to treat it as though we were in an actual assessment, but I will walk you through how I might do things differently if I were just writing an essay not under test conditions versus if I was writing it under test conditions. That said, step 1, familiarize yourself with the 7 key themes. Now, this is really crucial. I get a lot of students coming to me wanting to write essays well, and they're very articulate, so they clearly have the raw ingredients to be able to write high-scoring essays. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do that, but they haven't been walked through the 7 key themes very well. So I want to briefly walk you through the big ideas that are being tested here. And then it's going to be up to you with either your tutor or your teacher. And feel free to reach out if you want some support from me to really deep dive into each of these themes. So Australian English, this is touching on the theme of what are the unique features of Australian English? How is it different from, say, American English or British English, or the way that English is spoken in France or in Italy or in across Asia, whatever it is? What are the unique features of Australian English? And then also, we want to ask, what does that reflect about Australians? What does that reflect about who we are, what our values are, etc.? Which ties into this second theme of individual and group identity, and also a little bit of national identity. So on this, Unit 4 is the entire focus of Unit 4 is language and identity. And it's this theme of the way that we speak is tied in quite closely with who we are. And I want you to not just think about language can reflect our identity, but also that language can influence our identity and our attitudes and our worldview. So a lot of students only think about the reflect side of things, whereas I also want you to keep in mind the influence side of things as well. Now, when it comes to identity, you can drill down a little bit. I like to think about it as having 3 or 4 layers. So we have an individual identity. So who are we individually? How does our language reflect who we are as an individual? I might be warm and bubbly. I might be cold and aloof, and that might be reflected in my language. I might have certain hobbies or passions, whatnot. It can also reflect our social identity, so which social groups we are a member of. I might use certain language that indicates that I am a passionate what's a game? A passionate Minecraft player or something like this, or a passionate fan of the NBA, say. So I can signal my social identity through my language. You can also think about cultural heritage. So the way that you speak might reflect your cultural heritage. So for example, the way that my mum speaks, my mum is French. Just to give you one phonological example, she cannot pronounce the sound H. So she'll say, that is hilarious, instead of saying that is hilarious. And that would be a phonological feature that can reflect her cultural heritage. And then lastly, national identity. So how does Australian English and the language features that Australians use reflect our identity as a nation? So what are our core values? And I might just quickly give you a couple of ideas here. Now I've got a content cheat sheet that runs my students. If you're a private student here, refer to the Australian English Identity Cheat Sheet. Walks you through the various facets of the national identity and some of the language features that reflect those facets of the identity, of the national identity. But just to give you a clue or an idea here, we are, as Australians, we're renowned for being quite laid back and casual and relaxed, very friendly, very playful. And so we want to then go, okay, what aspects of the language earn us that reputation or reflect that national identity? So for example, the fact that we say mate, that we call strangers mate, that is Australian slang or Australian colloquialism, which we could say, well, the way that we use this slang reflects our identity, our national identity as a country, being very friendly, especially or even with strangers. And that's not something that we could necessarily say for British English or American English. So, and then we want to do that across a number of different facets of our identity. So I'll give you another example. Australian politicians tend to use, in many instances, quite informal language, and you can even things like profanity. And so you could find an example of that and say, okay, well, the fact that our leaders use this type of language and that we vote these people in, and that also when they use this type of language, say profanity in the public sphere, a lot of people, they don't go, oh, what a bad person. A lot of Australians say, okay, yeah, they're human. So again, how does our language and Australian English, the language used in the Australian context, reflect our national identity and who we are as a country? You can see there's a lot of base layer knowledge that we want to be familiar with before we actually even tackle an essay prompt. Register or formality. So you want to be familiar with the pros and cons, or the benefits and drawbacks of different registers, namely informal and also formal. You want to actually do the same with standard and non-standard varieties. So make sure that you're familiar with the difference between formal and informal, and then also standard and non-standard. So just to give you an example, because this is a common one that students get mixed up, Aboriginal English would be a non-standard variety of Australian English, but it's not necessarily informal. So it's important to understand the distinction. Perhaps you can ask your teacher to clarify a little bit more there. But we want to have, let's say, for example, we were having a tutoring session together. Ideally, I want to be able to ask you, what are the perks of using an informal register? And you can list off, say, 3 to 5 perks. What are the drawbacks of using an informal register? You can list 3 to 5. Same thing goes for formal. Sorry, did I say formal or informal? Hopefully you get the point here. You want to be able to list perks and drawbacks of formal and informal registers. And then you want to also be able to do the same with standard and non-standard varieties. So just quickly here as well to clarify, because I think it's a little bit confusing for some of you. Standard Australian English is the kind of correct way of speaking Australian English. I like to give the example of, if we were responsible for teaching some young people how to speak English in Australia, or we were teaching some immigrants how to speak English in Australia, the standard Australian English is the variety that we would be teaching. Everything, all the other varieties that aren't that are referred to as non-standard varieties. So non-standard Australian English varieties refers to the 3 main ones that I like to keep in mind, and that I like to go looking for examples to use and present in my essays, are Aboriginal English, Ethnolex, which are a combination of, say, French and English, or Italian and English, or Chinese and English, and then also teen speak. You can either do teen speak or digital discourse. Digital discourse would be the variety of language that we tend to use in online spaces. And teen speak, hopefully you're familiar with that term, but it's the non-standard variety that teenagers tend to speak. So again, we want to be familiar with the perks and drawbacks of all of those varieties, be it standard or non-standard. Social purpose, we want to be familiar. This theme essentially refers to how we use language to achieve what we want, and how we might use different language features in different situations to accomplish the social purpose of the text. I've mentioned varieties of English, attitudes to varieties of English. This more so refers to prescriptivism and descriptivism. So prescriptivists generally believe that there is a correct way to speak, the standard, and we ought to stick to the standard. And the reasoning behind that is hopefully, if you're already familiar with a couple of the perks of standard Australian English, the main one is that it allows for clear and effective communication between strangers and also a sense of unity through shared linguistic norms. I won't go too in depth on that. The flip side of that is descriptivism, which is the attitude or the general attitude that there's no one correct way to speak. We're open to language change and language evolving to match our changing identity or our changing values. And so I'll give you a clear example here. I think a really good example was the difference between my grandma and my mum. So when let's say, for example, I were to use a new teen speak slang term with my grandma and my mother. With my grandma, she would say, speak properly. That would be the prescriptivist attitude or response. Whereas my mum would be curious. She'd be like, oh, like, what does that mean? And like, maybe I can get in on this new trend. And so that would be more of the descriptivist attitude. You also want to be familiar with some of the attitudes, positive and negative, toward the standard and also non-standard. So for example, just to give you one specific example, a perk of, say, using Aboriginal English within the Aboriginal community might be signaling respect or establishing a sense of cohesion and unity. But also some people may interpret the use of non-standard varieties like Aboriginal English in the wrong context, say for example in an interview, as a proxy for lack of education. So if someone can't speak standard Australian English in the appropriate context, it can lead to, I suppose, negative outcomes for the user, given there are different attitudes to the different varieties of English. Modes of language essentially just refers to being familiar with how our language features and our language style might change between different modes, be it spoken or written, and also be it in the online space or in real life, so to speak. And then also language change. We want to be familiar with how language has changed, say, over the past 5, 10, 15 years, and what some of those changes represent. That's a commonly tested theme. So for example, we might look at how in the past there might have been an ad, say on Victoria Police's website, for a policeman, whereas nowadays you'll see an ad for police officer. And that would be an example. A policeman is technically, a meta-language term to describe that is a false generic, where it falsely generalizes that it's all men. When if there is a push for inclusion, in this case, inclusion of the different sexes, then that can also be reflected in our language, where instead of going for the false generic policeman, Vic Police will advertise the role as police officer. So it's a gender neutral title that's more inclusive, supposedly, of women. So there's like a brief summary of the 7 key essay themes. You want to be across that, or at least have had a conversation with your teacher or your tutor in a fair amount of depth, so that you actually understand each of those ideas before then tackling the essay prompts. Otherwise, when you tackle an essay prompt, if you haven't been given that base layer of knowledge, it's going to be really difficult. And you don't want to become discouraged thinking that you should somehow know it if you haven't been taught it, because that's not the case. So with that said, let's move on to step 2. We want to find contemporary language examples to present across those 7 essay themes. So I'm actually going to pull up my essay examples guide. Now, if you're a private student of mine, you have access to this. I actually might not show the full guide for you now, but if you are a private student of mine, I would recommend going through the essay examples guide. It just walks you through step by step my process. For those of you who are viewing this tutorial on a public platform and you're not a private student of mine, I will show you just briefly how a couple of hacks that I use for finding really, really good examples. So first of all, you can definitely find examples in real life around you, but you also want to have a process for reliably finding additional examples that fill out your essay examples folio. So as an example, let's say that we were looking for, first of all, we need a good search engine. So main search engines, Google, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. Those are the main ones. Now we need to figure out, what do we search for in those search engines? Now, a lot of you will, let's say, for example, you were looking for an example of a euphemism. Many of you will just say, head over to YouTube. We'll use YouTube as an example, and you'll just type in euphemism. that's not a good way to find real life examples of people using euphemisms in Australia this year. So searching directly for the meta language term that you want an example for, I would not recommend. It works very, very, very rarely. And in the instances where it does work, you'll find an example that literally 99% of the cohort has. So it's not a good way to differentiate yourself from everyone else. What I recommend is, instead of searching directly for the meta language term that you're looking for, you want to instead add an extra step. And the extra step is going, what is the situation, keyword situation, where I'm likely to find this type of language? Let's say that you were looking for a euphemism example or an example relating to the discussion of taboo topics. You're not going to search euphemism in YouTube. What you'll instead do is, now this is also something that only my private students will have access to, but I'll give you a part of it, or like a tip here. You want to have a list of some really, really good channels that serve as distributors of examples. So let me give you an example of one. We'll go 7 News. You can use any of the news channels in Australia. And then what you want to really do, what you want to do is make use of the thumbnails and the titles to find the language that you're looking for. So for example, I'd head over to videos. Now we could be looking, it doesn't have to be euphemisms that we're looking for. Maybe we're looking for some formal language examples or some informal language examples. And it doesn't help just searching informal language in the search bar. We want to look at the titles and go, okay, what type of topics and titles and thumbnails are likely going to have the examples that we're looking for. So let's just say, hypothetically, let's say we were looking for a euphemism. We can think about, well, what are some of the situations where we'll find the use of euphemisms? Any situation where we're discussing a taboo topic. So death and sex are the first two that come to mind. And so anything relating to death or tragedy, there's likely going to be some euphemisms that we can use. So I mean, just as an example, right, the Anzac Day speech, 110%, there's going to be some euphemisms around the taboo topic of death. Now, if you search euphemism, the Anzac Day speech is not going to come up. This is where, if we just have a look here, boom, 100%, I would just open that up. What else? Like just the fact that someone's crying in the thumbnail, you probably know there's going to be a euphemism there. Mother and 3-month-old baby found dead. Wow, that's really sad, but there will definitely be a language example there. Let's have a look here. Virgin Galactic launches first space tourist flight. There might be some jargon in there. State of shock. Maui local describes devastation caused by wildfires. 100%. There'll be more euphemism in there because it's very sad. What's this? So I'm just having a quick skim through the thumbnails here. I just want to see tragedy. Let's have a look. What else do we have here? Killer driver, blah, blah, blah. Yep, so I would open that up as well. So hopefully you can see here, it's a really effective means of, instead of just going, let me just watch something and fingers crossed I'll find what I need. It's going, okay, what exactly do I need? What type of situations am I likely to find that language in? And then boom, sniping that situation out by using a hack like this. You can do something similar on Twitter and TikTok. And if you're a private student of mine, I have in my personal essay examples folio that you will have access to. I also have a source list. So a bunch of links that will take you to places like 7 News, or a bunch of Twitter accounts, or a bunch of YouTubers who are just like fantastic sources for everything English language. So you literally shouldn't have any trouble finding more than enough examples in a very short amount of time if you are a private student of mine. Now, if you're not, then hopefully this at least gives you some clues to get moving in the right direction. I think that's a good summary of the essay examples guide. Now, coming back to the essay writing guide, let's say we're now familiar with the 7 key themes. We also have some juicy examples that we are ready to deploy, or at least we know how to find the examples if we need them. Then we sit down, we get our prompt, let's rock and roll. We're in reading time now. So next, we're going to read through the prompt and identify the key words. Now, I would recommend highlighting or circling them at the beginning of writing time to ensure you have not missed anything and don't get caught up in the speed of test conditions. Guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the biggest issues that I used to have and that I see a lot in students is they will bring me their responses and they'll understand the idea being tested, but they'll end up kind of drifting from the topic throughout their piece. And 9 times out of 10, it can be solved just by really highlighting or circling the keywords in the prompt, writing them at the top of each of your pages in your SAC or your exam. And then as you're explaining your examples, you just flick your eyes back up to the keywords and make sure, okay, am I still relating this back to the keywords in the prompt? If so, it's kind of like it's a way of keeping you on center, right? Whereas if you don't have that, it's very easy to drift. And trust me, I've been there, I've done that, and it was so easily solved by just really scribbling around the keywords and then making sure that I wrote them at the beginning of each of my, at the top of each of my pages in my assessments. Now, if there are any keywords that are up for interpretation, briefly brainstorm how you'll interpret them for your piece and be sure to signal this in to the examiner in your intro. So what I mean by this, actually, I might give you this example. An example of this might be enriched in the VCAR 2019 exam. So Australian English is always enriched by the non-standard English varieties operating in contemporary Australian society. Now, it's not clear exactly what enriched means here, and I've just signaled that I would interpret it as positively contributes or has a positive impact on the users of the language and the wider culture. And so I would make that interpretation clear in my intro, and then when I start presenting my points and my examples, VCAR or the reader understands exactly why I'm presenting them the way that I am. Another example here is successful communication, something like that. It's a little bit ambiguous as to what that means exactly. And so you want to make it clear to the reader how you've interpreted it. So you might say, okay, successful communication means that everyone is happy, or we accomplish our desired purpose, say. So you just want to keep your eyes open for non-metalinguistic terms in the prompt that are open to interpretation. And you want to make sure that you signal to the reader exactly how you've interpreted it. Moving on here, step 4, we read the stimulus material and use it to generate paragraph ideas. What I mean by this is as you read the stimulus material, ask yourself the question, what is the paragraph idea or clue that VCAR is giving me with the stimulus? Perhaps I can show you this a little further down the line for 1 or 2 stimulus material. But this is an elite skill to have. And this is something just to give you some context, I practice this. So you don't just become good at this just by writing lots of essays. I mean, you can, but if it's something that's holding you back, then practice it. Literally pull up a bunch of sample exams or prompts with stimulus material and just go through the stimulus one by one and just go, okay, if I had to create a paragraph idea from it, what would it be? And so that way you can kind of get hyper-focused VCAR style reps in for the thing that's holding you back, and in doing so, level up that part of your response. So you can see there's a game of strategy here. It's not just putting your head down and working. You also want to exercise the self-awareness that lets you pull up your weak points as opposed to having them kind of go by the wayside or consistently be the things that hold you back. And step 5, begin to mentally formulate your plan. So 3 body paragraphs unpacking 3 main points relevant to the prompt. By the end of reading time, you should have a rough idea of how you'll structure your paragraphs, as well as roughly which of your examples you'll present in each paragraph. So at the end of reading time, guys, we want to have a mental plan where we know roughly what our contention is. Contention being our general response to the prompt. Usually it's like a soft yes or a soft no. You know, we might present 2 paragraphs for or saying yes, and then ideally, if there's the option to do so, presenting a contrasting paragraph of some sort. But we want to have our contention and also an outline of our 3 body paragraphs, and also some of the examples that we're going to use in our paragraphs. Ideally, at the end of reading time, we want to have all of that already organized in our mind so that come the beginning of writing time, we're just ready to unleash. And again, hopefully, you may already be familiar with the fact that this subject, the assessments, you are strapped for time. You cannot afford to sit there and think and ponder. You have to have done all of this preparation, familiarizing yourself with the themes, getting really good examples, practicing generating paragraph ideas. You have to have nailed all of that and done the prep before you actually step into your assessment in order to be able to do this under test conditions. So then we move on to writing time. Once we hit writing time, we want to briefly jot down a plan. I cannot emphasize this enough as well. You want to spend roughly 5 minutes planning, and you want to view that 5 minutes as an investment for the next, say, 40 to 60 minutes that you'll spend writing your essay. Probably not 60, it'll probably be 40 to 50 minutes. Now, with that said, if you skip your plan, again, 9 times out of 10, if I read a student's response and they've been deviating from the topic or it's not clear what their point is, oftentimes, have you created a solid plan? The answer is no. So you want to invest those 5 minutes. It's going to allow you to write more efficiently, more fluently, and more on topic for when you actually are writing your intro and body paragraphs and conclusion. So I really do recommend writing a plan. And every time that I haven't written a plan, my essay does not go very well. So jot down your contention, so a brief summary of your position on the prompt, as well as an outline of your 3 paragraphs and the examples you'll present in each. If you are writing in test conditions, keep your plan brief and limit it to 5 minutes. I would recommend jotting down a paragraph title and 2 to 3 potential examples per paragraph. Now, my recommendation, just a heads up, is 2 examples per paragraph. But, some students, if they don't go as in depth as I do, then 3 can work as well. I would really recommend you want to get your teacher's feedback on this, or your tutor's feedback, or my feedback, whatever, on this, so that you understand, are you going in depth enough with your examples, and are you presenting enough examples as well? But for me, 2 examples plus a linguist quote is the sweet spot, and I'll give you more information on that in a moment. If it's one of your first times planning out a particular essay or tackling a particular prompt, I would recommend taking the time to go deep and fill out the essay planning template, and spending some additional time scouring the internet to find high quality examples, as I've kind of shown you just before. But if you're a private student of mine, definitely go through the essay examples guide. It's going to give you an even more in-depth step-by-step process, as well as some guidance as to where to look to find what you're looking for. You can also use the essay examples folio template. Now, when it comes to organizing your examples, I think it's worthwhile me just sharing with you, you don't just memorize your examples by winging it or creating some list with a bunch of links. For each example that you find that is high quality and you want to make sure that you remember it, you want to kind of break it down into some of the key information. So I would recommend breaking it down something similar to this. So getting the who, where, when, labeling it with a meta-language term, getting an actual quote from wherever you're getting it from. So this is the quote that you want to remember and be able to present. And you just want to briefly jot down, like, why are you presenting this example, or why might you present this example? For me as well, here's a quick tip. Perhaps we might have to blur a little bit of this out on the public platform, but if you are one of my private students, you will have access to my essay examples folio. What I recommend here, and you can see these are my top 15. There's a whole bunch more down here in the bonus example section, but these are my top 15 that I would recommend you familiarize yourself with. What I do for each of these, I'll just show you this first one, right? So this is the Victorian Government's LGBTIQ+ inclusive language guide, and I've broken it down into context, so who, where, when, a meta-language term or terms that I could potentially label it with, a quote from the document that I want to remember and be able to present in my pieces, and then some notes with respect to why is it an interesting example. So in this case, the inclusive language guide can reflect what is deemed politically correct in contemporary Australian society. It can also reflect our values as a collective, namely inclusion and diversity. So it helps me understand and remember, okay, anything to do with language reflecting attitudes or language reflecting our identity as a country, I could present this example. It's worth noting, however, that not everyone agrees with the updated language recommendations, as political correctness is viewed by some as an encroachment on free speech. So there have also been instances or critiques of people who've pushed back on this inclusive language guide, and you want to be able to present that, or at least mention it in your piece. Let's say, for example, there's a piece that's talking, or a prompt where you might be exploring prescriptivism and descriptivism. People who are pro language change to become more inclusive, a bit more of a descriptivist approach, may be very positive, have positive attitudes to an inclusive language guide like this, whereas people who may be slightly more prescriptivist may say, actually, no, we're not for this language change. So then here's the major tip that I want to give to you is I would recommend in your personal essay examples folio. Again, if you're a private student of mine, then I've got the essay examples folio template that you can just duplicate and begin filling out with your examples, and you can also use mine. But I would recommend tagging your examples with the themes. So I've got a couple of tags here, and what this lets me do is if I expand the toggles on this document, I can just quickly search. I might have to blur this out on the public platform, but let's just say, so these are some of the themes that I like to tag with. Let's say I had an essay on identity. I could just Command F, search for identity, and boom, I've got 19 instances where identity is mentioned in my examples folio. So I can really quickly find all the essay examples that might be relevant to this identity essay that I'm about to write. And let's say that, you might do the same thing for informal language or formal language or whatever it is. And so in that way, you organize your essay examples so that you have all of the information that you need, and also you can quickly find suitable examples whenever you're creating a plan. This is really, really beneficial and a great way of engaging with real life examples so that you actually integrate them into your memory, as opposed to just having like a Google Doc or something with a bunch of links and then somehow expecting yourself to remember them. So I hope that is helpful on that front. Okay, we've jotted down our plan. Now, I did want to show you the essay planning template. This is going to be a nice visual for you to understand how we actually structure an intro and body paragraphs and conclusion. So me personally, I have we're going to skip this first part of the template, but this is a nice visual on how I structure my essays. So, and this, again, when I'm creating a plan or I'm familiarizing myself with a brand new theme that I'm not familiar with, or when you're doing this, you ought to take the time to create a detailed plan instead of just doing like a 5-minute little scribble plan under test conditions. And when I'm doing that, this is what it will look like. So I have a process for writing high-scoring intros and conclusions. It's called GST for my intro and then STG for my conclusion. Now, if you're a private student of mine, you will be very familiar with this, but it's just a really easy way to pump out a high-scoring intro and high-scoring body conclusion as well. You don't want to stall on your intro. If you feel like you're waffling in your intro, if you feel like sometimes you get stuck in your intro, that is not good at all, right? Especially given this is a very time constrained assessment. So you want to make sure you have a process. It doesn't have to be GST or STG. You find something that works for you, but if you are a private student of mine, 110% run with GST and STG to begin with. There's a general statement, a specific statement, and then a thesis. Super, super simple there. Now, having said that, I actually will walk you through the theory here, just so that you understand the components of the intro. Now, I won't give you the details unless you're a private student. So the general statement is a nice broad opening sentence that addresses the theme of the essay. So behind the prompt, there's an essay theme, and that's what I want to touch on in my general statement. It's a nice way of welcoming the reader or warming the reader up to my piece. Then my specific statement is my contention. So this is my direct response to the prompt itself. And then my thesis is my paragraph outline. So this is where I'll make it clear to the reader what are the points I'm going to be making in my body paragraphs. For my conclusion, it's pretty much the same thing, usually a little bit shorter and a slightly different order, just to kind of summarize everything and then lead the reader out of the piece whilst feeling a sense of resolve, like kind of like there's been a full stop placed at the end of my essay. So there's a theory behind it. And again, if you're a private student of mine, you'll be more than familiar with this. So moving into the body paragraph, I wanted to give you a visual here. I have a topic sentence, I have 2 examples, and then I also have the opportunity to present a linguist or commentator quote. I would recommend you think about this as, let's say you're baking a cake, you need the flour, you need the eggs, you need the milk, whatever. Those are your examples. The linguist or commentator quote is kind of like the icing on the cake. So I want to give you an example here. Let's say that we had a body paragraph and the focus was on how language can reflect that as a country, we have this value for inclusion. And maybe our first example, we're going to present that inclusive language guide and say, okay, here's a real life example of the government recommending using this type of language, and it reflects this passion or this value of ours for inclusion. The linguist quote is just someone backing up what we're saying. So we might use a linguist quote like, now I'm going to blur this section for those of you who are viewing this on the public platform. But if you are a private student of mine, then you will have access to my top linguist quotes. A really good one that we could use in this piece that I will share with all of you who are public as well, public students or students that aren't private. Let's come back to for something like this, we could use a quote that just backs up the point that we're making. So if we're making that point that the Inclusive Language Guide reflects this value for inclusion, then a linguist quote that might back that up is that of all markers of identity, language is by far the most significant. And this is a quote by a gentleman called Bruce Moore from ANU School of Literature, to be precise. And you can see if the point that we're making is that our language can reflect our underlying values and our identity, then this quote is just a professional, someone out there in the world. We're not using his language as an example, right? We're not using it as an example. We're just saying, once we've explained our point, we're just kind of saying, hey, look at this professional over here. He's saying the same thing as what we are, or what he says kind of backs up our point. That's the way you want to think about the linguist quotes. Now, a linguist quote will not save your piece, okay? So if you have a horrible cake, no amount of really good icing is going to save it. So that's why I give that cake analogy. Your examples, they need to be good. Your explanations need to be good. And then if you want the icing on the cake, that is your linguist quote. I'd recommend integrating 1 to 2 throughout the entirety of your piece. Now, you don't have to go looking for new ones. If you are a private student of mine, just use the ones that are in the linguist quotes folio. They cover all of the main themes and are very versatile as well. So don't waste your time searching for more quotes. If you don't have linguist quotes, then I'd recommend asking your teacher for some goodies. Let's come back to here then. So hopefully we have a rough idea of how to structure our piece: intro, body paragraph, conclusion. I've kind of jumped the gun a little bit here, but step 7, write your intro. I personally use the GST model that I've mentioned. And then we go through our body paragraph. So step 8, write your body paragraphs. Your topic sentence should succinctly summarize the point you're trying to make in this particular paragraph. So you want to think about it this way. If you're not clear on your contention, your topic sentences won't be clear. If your topic sentence isn't clear, you won't be able to clearly present your examples to make whatever the point is in your topic sentence. So again, that's a situation where you might have elite level examples, but if your topic sentence isn't clear, they're going to fall short. So, and whenever I'm clarifying this with students, if I'm reading a student's piece and I'm giving them feedback, if their topic sentence isn't clear, I'll just ask them, what exactly is the point that you're trying to make here? So I'd recommend practicing that, asking yourself that question when you're writing your topic sentence. Just pause for a moment and say, what is the point that I am trying to make here? And it should directly relate back to the contention or to the prompt. And oftentimes when you ask yourself that question, you'll kind of word vomit something out. It'll be long and waffly, and then you want to try and compress it. So you can ask yourself that question multiple times, and each time you get more and more clear on what is the point you're trying to make, and then you put pen to paper. So take a moment to get clear on your topic sentences. Really, really crucial. Something that tends to happen if you're not clear on the point that you're making, you'll tend to waffle in your topic sentence. So don't try and spruce up your topic sentence with fancy words unless you are super clear on the key point that you're making. It's better to be simple and clear than it is to be all fancy to try and hide the fact that you don't know exactly the point that you're making. As for your examples, I personally recommend using CTEWH to break them down, analyze, and present them. Further, I typically slot a linguist quote between my first and second example. So I've shown you in the essay planning template, that's kind of where I tend to slot my linguist quote, is between my first and second example. If you are a private student, you'll have access to the essay response template, and that shows you some of the language that I use to actually present my quote. But when it comes to our examples, this is what this little flow chart or diagram represents. So it's C, T, E, W, H. So that's the order that I kind of present my information in. Think about it as teal. So usually it's like term, example, or topic sentence, example, explain or elaborate or evidence, and then link. Think about CTEWH as being teal, but a little bit more specific. Now, I'm not going to say you should completely switch up the way that you write if you use teal. Use whatever works well for you. I just found that sometimes with teal, I didn't know how to go deeper or be more specific. And so that's eventually when I found myself using CTEWH, and my responses just went to the next level. So perhaps you can try the shoe on for size. Is that the expression? So the C stands for context. So I'm going to give my reader context on the example I'm about to present. So I'll give them the who, the where, the when. If they're not familiar with the situation, I need to explain, who is saying this? When did they say it? And where did they say it? So that the reader understands, okay, they're like ready to hear my explanation of the example. Then I label with meta language. Now, this is something that students often overlook just because it's the essay. You have to still label with meta language. That's not exclusively for short answer and AC. Then I present my example. Then I ask myself, why am I presenting my example? Now, this is kind of like the second E in teal, but I just prefer asking myself, why am I presenting this example? And I'll elaborate. I'll write a sentence or two there. And then I'll ask myself, how does this relate or link back to my topic sentence or the prompt? And it's that division between the why and the how. For any of you who have watched the short answer question writing guide or the AC writing guide, it's kind of like I mentioned how some students will just go directly from their language feature to one of the contextual factors instead of first asking what is the effect and then linking. It's the same here. You can think about the H being like the link, and the W is what is the effect. You need to have some kind of elaboration or exploration or explanation before you go on and link it back to your topic sentence or to your prompt or your contention. Otherwise, if you skip this W part, it's going to feel a little bit superficial, not in-depth enough. So if you get feedback on your piece being too superficial or not in-depth enough, before you link back to your topic sentence or to the prompt, you want to ask yourself, why am I presenting this example? Let me explain that to the reader before I say, okay, it's supporting the point that I'm making in my topic sentence. And then last of all, once we've done that for our body paragraphs, perhaps before I jump onto that, I do just want to mention, if you can write a good topic sentence and you can present or break down one example in depth with CTEWH and also express that in full sentences with a template of some sort that gives you the language, aka the essay response template for my private students. If you don't have that, then feel free to create your own or get one from your teacher. But if you can do that for one example, then you can do it for 6 examples. If you can do it for 6 examples, you pretty much have a high scoring essay ready to rock and roll. So I want you to notice how it's very modular. And this is, again, where you don't just want to randomly study for the subject. You want to get clear on what's the thing that's holding me back. Is it my intros? Do I need to revise GST? Do I need to get more practice? Is it the quality of my examples? Or do I have a good topic sentence and good examples, but I'm struggling with the breakdown, the CTEWH? Is it my W that's lacking? Or am I forgetting to label with T, the meta-language term? You want to get clear on what is holding you back personally. Once you're able to do that, let's say, for example, you can write an intro. If you can write an intro, you can write a conclusion. And let's say that you are able to write a good topic sentence and you're able to break down one example well and express yourself. There's no reason why you can't write a full high-scoring essay for VCE Ing Lang. So I just wanted to point out how it's very modular. You can break it down into the little constituent parts. And then when you get guided through the micro steps for each of the constituent parts, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, maybe I could actually write a high scoring response. Now, lastly, step 9, write your conclusion. I personally use STG. Like I mentioned before, I'll skip this part. And step 10, leave 5 minutes to read over your piece and amend any spelling errors or sentence flow hiccups. Now, obviously this is kind of like perfect world scenario. I would recommend trying to do this. I certainly found it very helpful. I picked up a couple of errors in my final exam, and luckily I allowed myself those 5 minutes. If the reader is having to kind of stumble over a grammatical error or a spelling error every couple of lines, it can be very off-putting, and you just don't want to risk that when it's your teacher or the examiner reading through your piece. So a very worthy investment, making sure you wrap up as best you possibly can to allow yourself for 5 minutes to just go through and brush up, make sure everything's nice and neat. Now that is the content aspect or half of this video tutorial done. I now want to show this to you briefly for an actual VCAR exam prompt. So let's do that now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've covered the majority of the content and theory relating to how to write high-scoring essays in VCE English Language Units 3-4, or at least my process for doing so. Again, there's no one way to skin a cat, but this is what has worked really well for me, and I hope that it's going to be eye-opening for you and also useful. Now, what I'd like to do is show you how to apply some of that content and theory that I've just walked through to an actual VCAR style prompt. And I want to do it for a Unit 3 focused prompt, as you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, a Unit 3 focused prompt for an intro and conclusion. So I want to show you how I break down my intro into GST and then my conclusion into STG and what that looks like exactly. You can steal a couple of the expressions that I use and you may be able to repurpose them for your pieces. And then I want to show you how I write part of a body paragraph for more of the prompt I'm going to be looking at is a Unit 3-4 prompt, but I'm going to be doing a paragraph that's more so focused on a Unit 4 part of the course, which is non-standard language and its perks. So that being said, I'm not going to go through the entire essay writing guide step by step and show you each step. I'm going to be more so showing you the step 7 and step 8. So I hope that this is helpful. Let's dive into things. So the Unit 3 prompt, now I've just made this prompt up. I've deliberately kept it quite simple because the focus here isn't going nitty gritty on the essay theme. It's more so just showing you how we write an intro and conclusion here. So the prompt that I've chosen is formal language has an important place in contemporary Australian society. To what extent do you agree? Now, whenever you get a to what extent do you agree or discuss, you never want to say a hard and fast no in English language. What we want to do, we want to take the position of like, oh, okay, there might be a couple of perks, there might be a couple of drawbacks, or like yes, usually, and no, sometimes, right? So we want to have a balanced perspective, and we want to explore the ideas relating to the prompt as opposed to picking a side. So that's really important to know. That's also going to affect the voice or the tone of your piece. You're not trying to persuade anyone. You want to be analyzing the language. That's our role in VCE English language. So let's say then that after having familiarized ourselves with the themes and used the stimulus material and the keywords in the prompt, we settled on these 3 body paragraph ideas. Formal language has an important place when our objective is to first and foremost clarify and communicate clearly. Formal language has an important place when our objective is to maintain face needs and avoid offense. And thirdly, informal language has an important place too, specifically when our objective is to build rapport and a sense of unity. So that would be my contrasting paragraph. Now, sometimes the language that I use to describe what I'm doing here is it's a soft yes. First body paragraph is like, yes, formal language has a role and here's why. Second body paragraph is, yes, formal language has a role, here's another reason why. And then third body paragraph is, however, there are certain things that only informal lang can do, or where we really do need informal lang, and this is its central place as well. So now that I know what my body paragraphs are going to be, if I were under test conditions, I've got a mental outline of the key parts that I'm going to be fleshing out in my introduction. So I know that my general statement is going to be focused on the theme. And in this case, the theme is, it's at the intersection of register and social purpose. So different registers, their perks and drawbacks, and why we use them to accomplish different things. My specific statement is going to be focused on the prompt or contention. So it's essentially going to be, yes, formal language has an important role. And then my thesis is going to be my paragraph breakdown. First paragraph is formal lang important because it helps clarify and communicate. Second paragraph, formal lang is important because it helps us maintain face needs and avoid offense. And then third paragraph, but also informal lang is important to build rapport and unity. So a little bit of shorthand here just to demonstrate to you the way that I'm thinking about things as I'm actually going about and writing my introduction. So this is what my introduction looks like. Now I've saved us a bit of time and wrote this out in advance, but I've color coded the different sections here so you can see what's going on. So my general statement is, remember, it's focused on the theme, which is that we use different registers to accomplish different things. So choosing the appropriate register for any given context is a crucial step in achieving successful communication. Quick tip for you. You can recycle your general statements between different prompts so long as they're addressing the same theme. So you might get a prompt that's really similar to this one, and you hypothetically would be able to recycle this general statement. Now, if you are a private student of mine and you have access to the essay response template, there's a number of general statements in there that you can recycle for your essays, or you can just draw inspiration from them, but having a general statement that really neatly and eloquently opens your piece, it's just a great way to set the tone of your piece and wow an examiner. Then I move on to my specific statement. So I'm going to be essentially saying, yes, formal lang has an important role. Now, I have a couple of expressions that I use to bridge from my general statement to my specific statement. Again, if you have access to the essay response template, make use of those expressions. They're all listed in there. If not, then you can just use this one here. So this holds true in contemporary Australian society, wherein blah, 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 and then I give my contention, which in this case is super formal. Formal language has an important place, the soft yes. Then I'm going on to my paragraph ideas here. So now I will mention, when it comes to your thesis, you can either do it in 1 sentence, or you can do it in 2 sentences, or max 3 sentences, I would say. So typically when I have a yes, yes, no structure for my body paragraphs, which is essentially what I've got here, it's kind of like yes, yes, and then a contrasting, I'll do it in 2 sentences. So I'll try and combine the 2 yeses into 1 sentence. Unless it gets too long, then I'll split it. And then I'll start a new sentence to just mention and place a bookmark on what my third paragraph, my contrasting paragraph will be. Let's do this. A formal register can be particularly useful and necessary in instances and contexts where one's goal is to clarify and communicate clearly, first paragraph idea, or where maintaining face needs and avoiding offense is a priority, second paragraph idea. However, it is, and this is my third paragraph, now if you're using the essay response template, there's a number of really nice contrastives like however that you can use. So again, make use of that. It is nonetheless worth noting and appreciating the equally important place for informal registers, especially so when attempting to build rapport and establish community. So really, really clean intro there. The general statement leading the reader into things, specific statement clarifying the position or the general response to the prompt, outlining my contention, and then the thesis very succinctly outlining here are my 3 body paragraphs so the reader knows exactly what to expect, and we can very quickly jump on to our first body paragraph. Now, I want to show you how similar that is to my conclusion. We're mentioning the same things, we just don't want it to be too repetitive, and we switch up the order a little bit. So instead of doing GST, we're doing STG. So I'm taking my general statement and finishing with it instead of starting with it. So let's take a look here. Specific statement, which is essentially just saying formal lang has an important place, but I've reworded it nice and eloquently. In conclusion, formal language unequivocally has an important role to play in contemporary Australian society. Another really nice expression you can use in contemporary Australian society. Another really nice word you can use unequivocally. A little tip for you, the way that I built out my vocabulary to kind of have these really nice little sparkle words is read through the high scoring response that VCAR has in the exam reports. And whenever you read a really nice word, check the definition obviously, and then add it to a list. And then as you're writing, just have that list up next to you and you can kind of revisit the list and think, okay, is there an opportunity for me to work in some really nice, impressive language here? Now, just to be clear, don't do it just for the impressive language. If you don't know how to use it properly and you misuse it, it's going to detract from your piece. So be careful there. So we give our specific statement, then we give our thesis. So this is clearly the case, especially so in instances where a language user wishes to prioritize clarity of communication, or maintaining social harmony. So that's kind of summarized my first 2 body paragraphs. And then, however, as discussed, informal language has an equally important role when it comes to building rapport and encouraging unity. And that summarizes my 3rd body paragraph. Now we want to wrap up with our general statement, which again, if we were to just summarize it, it's essentially that we need to choose the right register for any given context to make sure we accomplish what we want. And I've just said that more eloquently. So as such, another nice expression you might like to put in your back pocket, both formal and informal registers have their place, and notice how I've deliberately used the language from the prompt, which was important place. Lots of like small little tactics here to create that sense of cohesion in your piece. As such, both formal and informal registers have their place, and choosing the right one for any given context is the key to successful discourse. Boom. My hope there is that gives you a much more tangible and clear demonstration of what this GST and STG model looks like for step 7 and step 9 of the essay writing guide. And this is literally the formula or the blueprint that I use for every single essay intro and conclusion that I write. Now, I will add, you don't have to follow it uber strictly. So once you get the hang of GST and STG, that's where you can start to let go a little bit, and you can start to kind of maybe blend your S and your T, or your G and your S and whatnot. So I just want to be clear here. Again, there's no one way to skin a cat, and also this is just a starting point. The same applies for our body paragraphs, and that's a nice segue for us into, let me show you how I write a body paragraph. Now I've already written this in advance to save us some time, but I'll show you the constituent parts and how I came up with them, and what this CTEWH framework in step 8 of the essay writing guide actually looks like in practice. Now I will add again, CTEWH is the order in which I usually present the information, but you can blend a little bit the CTE. So, you know, once you've got the hang of the different parts that you ought to be outlining when you're presenting an example, you can be a little bit flexible with the order with which you present them. And you might find that, you know, your T and your E blend together, or you switch the order and whatnot, or your W and your H might blend together. Or like what I mentioned before, usually I'll insert my linguist quote between my 2 examples in my body paragraph, but sometimes there'll be a really nice opportunity to insert it into, say, my W down here or my H. And I've actually created an example in this body paragraph I'm about to show you. That's what I've done. I've actually inserted it midway through my W because there was a great opportunity for it. So I just wanted to highlight that to you, that this framework, this formula, it is a starting point. And once you use the formula a couple of times, you'll be able to let go of the formula or template a little bit and feel your way into it. But don't just try to feel your way into it from the very beginning. So I hope that that's clear. Now, with that said, let's have a look at what this step 8 looks like. Now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of context here first. So the prompt that we're going to take a look at, it's an actual VCAR prompt. It's the first essay on the 2021 exam. And the prompt is, it's just language. Who cares if it's formal or informal, standard or non-standard? To what extent is this true in contemporary Australian society? So I just want to walk you through my thought process here. So when it comes to the keywords and generating paragraph ideas, it's just language. Who cares? Now, what came to me when there was this list of formal and informal, standard or non-standard is, why do people care that we use formal in certain situations? Why do people care that we use standard in certain situations? Why do people care that we use informal or non-standard in certain situations? So notice then that this almost is testing that theme of pros and cons of formal and informal, standard and non-standard. So again, that's a key skill that you'll get practice at, is identifying the theme behind the wording in the prompt, because VCAR can sometimes kind of throw you off a little bit with the way that they word things. But here, one of my paragraphs would definitely be focused on the perks of non-standard and informal language. And I may as well do another paragraph separate that would be focused on the perks or reasons why people care about using the standard in certain scenarios, because it makes things easy to understand, or using formal language in certain scenarios because it helps signal respect. Say at a funeral, we would speak with a formal register in that instance to signal sincerity and respect. But there are also instances where informal and non-standard play a crucial role, in particular for marking identity or expressing or constructing identity, a couple of nice keywords for you there, or signaling respect and promoting social harmony. So in this particular instance, I'm actually going to zero in and focus on non-standard language just to make this a little bit more of like a Unit 4 demonstration, because Unit 3 is more so focused on formal and informal. Unit 4, there's more of a focus on standard and non-standard. And the example that I'm going to present for you in this body paragraph is this one here. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of context here, and notice how everything that I'm about to explain to you to give you context is what you would have to give to a reader to help them understand what's going on here and why you're presenting this example. So this is kind of like the who, where, when. So this lady, her name is Pat Anderson, but notice how they call her Auntie Pat Anderson. Our Prime Minister also calls her Auntie Pat Anderson, even though she's not our Prime Minister's biological auntie, right? This is where we need a little bit of an understanding of the theme behind this, which is non-standard variety, in particular Aboriginal English. There is a key feature or a characteristic feature of non-standard Aboriginal English is the use of these non-standard honorifics. So I want to get you a definition over here. An honorific is a title that conveys esteem, courtesy, or respect for position or rank when used in addressing or referring to a person. So some standard honorifics are things like sir and madam, but auntie and uncle are non-standard Aboriginal English honorifics. That's our meta-language term here. And she's referred to, Auntie Pat Anderson isn't just referred to as auntie within the Aboriginal community, but she's referred to as auntie by now the mainstream media and our Prime Minister. Now, usually within the Aboriginal community, auntie is used to refer to elders and to signal respect to elders within their community. So all of that, we're going to need to compress that into a couple of sentences when we're giving context to our reader. So CTEWH, here's how I break it down. Again, you don't have to use CTEWH. Use what works for you. If you're really familiar and it's using teal is working well for you, by all means keep running with it. If it's not working well for you and you're looking for a little bit more structure, a little bit more guidance, I found CTEWH to be very helpful. So my C here is giving the context. So I mentioned Pat Anderson. So remember who, where, when. So Pat Anderson, Aboriginal woman, this should be woman, internationally renowned as an advocate for the rights and health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. She's a high-profile advocate specifically in 2023 for the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Now, just to give you context, it's August. Now, this tutorial should be evergreen for quite some time, but it is August 2023. So there's an upcoming referendum later this year, which is why I want to mention why this is a contemporary language example. It's not just that she's been mentioned in an article. She's a high profile figure at the moment, and which is why she's being spoken about in The Guardian and other mainstream media outlets, as well as by our Prime Minister. And I mentioned the mainstream media and our leading politicians, including the Prime Minister, have referred to her in a way similar to the way she has always been addressed within her Aboriginal community, which is in particular through the use of the non-standard Aboriginal English honorific, that's my meta language term, and then give my example, auntie. Now, my W and my H, this is where a lot of students trip up. This part's pretty straightforward. We're kind of just laying out facts almost. And then, don't forget to label with meta language. But then the W and the H is where a lot of students trip up. So I want to give you a little bit more insight into how I came up with this. I sometimes think about my H. You can almost think about the W and H as being the second E in your teal. Like the explain or elaborate is like the W. The W, and then the H is kind of like the link. So I always found it easier though, asking myself why and how, and that's why I've got this W and the H. So the how, sometimes a little tip for you, I like getting clear on my how, and then if I've given my CTE and I know what my how is, it kind of helps me understand what I need to put as my W. So my how, I want to be able to say, I told you so. I told you so. This example supports the point that I'm making in this paragraph, or it supports my contention. And then W is everything else that I need to lay out so that it links nicely from my CTE through to my H. So in this case, my W is this use of non-standard language not only helps Anderson signal her identity via language as a proud Aboriginal woman to the broader community, but it also allows the broader community to signal a respect for Anderson, her role as an elder and leader in the Aboriginal community, as well as more generally signal a respect for the wider public toward this central element of Aboriginal culture. So notice how what I'm saying there is very, very specific to the example itself. But then my H, when I'm asking how does this link back to my topic sentence or to the prompt or contention, I go from this zoomed in, very specific explanation of the example, and I zoom out and link to the big picture. So some nice words you can use here, by the way, in kind of bridging from your W to your H or your E to your L, demonstrating or illustrating or explaining. So you can add them to your bank. Demonstrating how the claim, it's just language, can be rather naive and dismissive, for the deliberate use of non-standard language here can be seen to have a number of important implications, namely signaling one's identity and expressing respect. Now notice how another key tip for you, I've deliberately delayed the use of some of the keywords in the prompt, like cares and just language. I've deliberately delayed them for my H statement, because that's where I want to deliberately create those cohesive ties back to either my topic sentence or the contention or the prompt. So that said, I now want to pull that off to one side, pull that over here. And this is my sample paragraph. It's just at the bottom of this doc, but I want to have my CTE WH breakdown on the left-hand side of my screen and then my paragraph on the right. And what I've done here, I've just color-coded it a little bit to help you visualize and understand how I've glued all these pieces together in full sentences. Now, hopefully you can see we've already done all of the thinking in breaking it down with CTE-WH. All of our thinking is there. We just need to glue that together in a fully written response. Now, some of you may have no trouble with that. That would be fantastic. If you do have trouble with that, you might understand the example and the ideas, but you have trouble actually expressing yourself in full sentences. That's where, if you're a private student of mine, definitely make use of the essay response template. That is all of the language that can help you get your ideas out onto the page. So for example, I gave you a couple of clues before with respect to some of the words that link nicely from your W to your H, demonstrating, explaining, or illustrating. All of those kinds of words are in the essay response template as well. So make use of that. That being said, now I will just mention as well, if you don't have access to that and you don't become a private student of mine, you can still create something similar for yourself by reading past high scoring responses. Whenever you see a nice expression that you would like to use for yourself, add it to some kind of doc, and then next essay that you're writing, have that doc up next to you so that you can use it and you're ready to rock and roll. So let's go through this. This is my topic sentence. Nice and simple. The point that I'm making, right, in this paragraph is that non-standard language has an important role in particular, and people care about its use because it has an important role in signaling identity and signaling respect as well. So language can play a central role in both signaling identity and promoting social harmony, particularly so via the use of non-standard language. Now, this sentence here, again, there's a couple of these in the essay response template. It's just a nice sentence, or there are a couple of similar expressions that are really nice for guiding the reader from our topic sentence into our first example. So many examples in contemporary Australian society and the mainstream media demonstrate this. Feel free to take that sentence and use it for yourself. Then I jump into my first example, which is this one here, the Pat Anderson example. Take for one, the increasing prevalence. Before I jump into this, I wanted to mention, this is my CTE. If we look here on the left-hand side of my screen, CTE, that's what this part here is on the right-hand side of my screen. Now, there are some examples, I would say most examples, you will not need to give this much context, but there is a lot of context required for this specific example. I just want to set the expectation with you that sometimes you can give all the context you need in like half a sentence or one sentence. In this case, I've had to flesh it out in a little bit more depth. So don't feel as though when you're writing your essays, it has to be anywhere near as long as this every single time. That's not the case. But in this instance, take for one, the increasing prevalence and borrowing of non-standard Aboriginal honorifics, auntie and uncle, used to refer not to blood relations, but rather used to refer to community elders. Now I want to demonstrate, or just point out to you here, it was suitable for me to actually give my T and my E, in this case, before I gave all of my C. So again, just coming back to CTEWH, great place to start, but you can start to blend the different components. And I wanted to demonstrate this to you in an actual response so you understand it's not super rigid. It's just a guideline to get you started. Such language is no longer solely used within the Aboriginal community, but also now within the public sphere. It not only holds covert prestige, but now is also gaining overt prestige. With the upcoming referendum to vote on a constitutionally enshrined Indigenous voice to Parliament, a number of high-profile elders in the public eye have been providing comment. When referencing these elders, say for example, Pat Anderson, and now I'm diving into my who, where, when, a famous Indigenous rights campaigner who is partaking in the public discussion, mainstream media outlets including The Guardian and our leading politicians, including our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, have referred to her as Auntie Pat Anderson, not just Pat Anderson. So now I've given my full CTE, and I can move on to my W and my H. Now, this in green is my W, and as I mentioned before, there was a great opportunity to kind of slide in a linguist quote from my linguist quotes folio. Again, if you're a private student of mine, you will have access to that. If you don't, then feel free to take this quote. I'm more than happy for you to use it. It's a really nice one for any essay where there is an emphasis on the connection or the value of language and it encoding culture. So that special link between language and culture, you can use this linguist quote. So I'm going to essentially just turn this part on the left-hand side of my screen into full sentences here. It's close to a copy paste. So again, we've already done all of the hard thinking in fleshing out the CTEWH. Once we've done that, it's nice and easy to actually express in full sentences. This use of non-standard language not only helps signal Anderson's identity as a respected Aboriginal woman in the broader community, but it also allows the broader community to signal their respect for Anderson and more generally for Aboriginal culture. As in the wise words of Frantz Fanon, to speak a language is to take on a world, a culture. The use of non-standard language here can play a key role in signaling an understanding and respect for Aboriginal culture and its people. Explaining why, now we're on to our H, explaining why many people care quite strongly about the type of language used. It's not just language. Now notice here, I've deliberately delayed the use of key words in the prompt until my H, and my W is much more focused on the specifics of the example and what it's doing. But then it's like once I've given my W, I'm zooming out a little bit and linking to the prompt and the contention in the topic sentence by dropping in the keywords or synonyms of the keywords. Thus, choosing the appropriate language style. This is my I told you so statement. Thus, choosing the appropriate language style, be it standard or non-standard, for a given situational or cultural context is a crucial element in both constructing identity and promoting social harmony. Another such example is blah, 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 blah. Again, there are a couple of expressions like that in the essay response template, but you want to have something that kind of leads you into your second example. Then you do the same thing for your second example, CTEWH, boom, high scoring body paragraph. So if you understand how I broke down this example with CTEWH, you understand the components. Yes, it'll take you some practice to be able to do that yourself. But if that makes sense, and you can see how that CTEWH has turned into a body paragraph, there's no reason why you can't replicate that for yourself. And if you can do that for one example, you can do it for 6 examples. If you can do it for 6 examples and have an intro and conclusion, boom, high scoring essay. So I just want to point out how modular it is. It's just like there are different Lego pieces. You need to assemble the Lego pieces. And if you do them in the right order, in the right way, boom, you get your high scoring response. There's no magic to it. There's no like gut feeling. It is a formula, a process to follow. And the goal is that you understand the formula, you have the blueprint, you have the tools to get the job done, say with the essay response template, if you're a private student, and then you're guided in the application such that after your first couple of, say for example, you use the writing guide and maybe you use the response template as well, the first couple of times, they're going to be really, really helpful. But after your 3rd, 4th, 5th attempt, you won't need the instruction guide anymore. You won't need the writing guide anymore. You won't need the response template because the language and the steps in both of them are going to be integrated into your memory, and it won't be my formula or my process anymore. It'll then be yours. Alrighty, so ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this video tutorial on how to write high-scoring essay responses for VCE English language, specifically Unit 3-4. I hope that you have found this helpful. Feel free to watch back. Feel free to ask questions if anything is unclear or you'd like any additional information. But I do truly hope that this has provided you with some guidance and some structure and a little bit of a step-by-step process that you can use to replicate the type of responses that I was writing, but for yourself. Now, if you would like some additional assistance, if you're at that stage where you are starting to realize and really appreciate that Eng Lang has to be a part of your top 4 subjects, and therefore it's not like your other subjects, it plays a central role in your ATAR, and you're shooting for an ATAR that is going to take you places instead of get you stuck in some course that you really do not like. If you are at that stage and you are looking for some professional guidance, then feel free to get in touch. There'll be a link below this video where you can submit your details on my website, and then we can give you a buzz and touch base, see what you need, and see how I and my team might be able to help you. With that all said, guys, best of luck, Godspeed, take care of yourselves, bye.